The following podcast is a deep, shallow dive production.
And you're gonna love it.
Okay, let's go.
But I thought I'd start off with something that hopefully will make you laugh, and it is breaking news. I've got Ethan Levins on the podcast. And for anybody that follows Ethan Levins, which by the way, I will put all his links and you absolutely should follow him. He is living in Europe. I'm not going to give away his country, but he's living in Europe. So he's 9 hours ahead of me in California. And so practically every morning when I wake up and I open up Instagram, the first thing I see on my feed is breaking news.
Yeah.
From my man, Ethan Levins. Welcome, buddy.
What's going on? Yeah, the breaking news, I get that a lot, where it's, why are you yelling in the comments? And I'm just like, because I'm excited to talk about what's happening. It's awesome. And, I got people to hear me. But, it's
Absolutely
nice to chat it up.
Absolutely. In case anyone hasn't heard it, give us a breaking news. I'm recording with Ray on the Deep Shallow Dive.
Okay. Breaking news. I'm recording with Ray on the Deep Shallow Dive.
There we go. That's fantastic. All right. Listen, let's get into it. And obviously we have got to start with what's going on Israel, Iran. Give us, first of all, what you're seeing, because unlike most people, man, you are a hawk when it comes to paying attention to the news. So first of all, give us an update as you're seeing it. Help us understand how you think this, or why you think this started, and kind of where we're at right now.
Yeah, we'll start why this started. The mainstream media, that's cliche to say, but they push this as Iran cannot have nuclear weapons. They have these facilities on the ground. They pose a threat to everybody. Literally, the only way to deter any sort of attack would be to obtain a nuclear weapon. We see regimes worse than Iran, like North Korea. Once you have a nuclear weapon, it simply makes you perfectly, safe from attacks, like Israel is showing the world right now. If you're in a process of making a nuke, Israel's going to attack you in the Middle East. It's happening right now. The Israelis have been having this 20 to 30 year plan, essentially, to dominate the Middle East economically, militarily, politically. They took down Assad in Syria last year, or Al-Qaeda did, supported by us and the U.S. and Israel. And then we saw Iraq in 2003 when Saddam was overthrown. And all that's left is Iran. So this nuclear weapon fiasco, we saw it in Iraq. And for 20 years, all we would hear is there was no WMDs in Iraq, no weapons of mass destruction. And it's the same script is playing out right now. There are some attacks going to happen on a U.S. base, but Iran is doing really good at sitting back and taking this, kind of trying to show the world, we don't want this. We're not attacking the U.S. We're not going to attack the U.S. The president came out yesterday and said, we don't even want a nuclear weapon. So it begs the question, what is Israel doing? They attacked first. Iran didn't attack Israel. These are all retaliatory. Iran isn't launching back-to-back strikes. All of them are retaliatory. And if you're wondering why does Iran strike throughout the day, which people have this illusion that this is just overnight Iran is shooting out missile barrages, it's happening 24/7. They're flying drones over. These drones are getting completely shot down over the Jordan airspace, the Iraqi airspace. But Israel is just dominating the skies right now in Iran. These are 24/7 bombings. Everyone saw literally the Iranian news station was hit with a strike. How else can you say I'm the bad guy by bombing a news station live on air like Israel did? They have fives in the sky, Iran shooting some of them down, but this is a total incapacitation by the Iranians. They have totally no defenses against this at this point. Israel's posing this, Trump came out today, they're posing this as, we cannot let them have a nuclear weapon. All this has done is made it guaranteed that Iran's going to get a nuclear weapon, because if they don't have one, Israel's going to attack you anyway. So what's going to happen is this is going to...
That's a great point, man. That is a great point. The fact that they're couching this under they cannot have a nuclear weapon, which, by the way, is very interesting. I think in March of this year, so what are we talking, 2 months ago, Tulsi Gabbard came out in front of Congress and said, based on all of our intelligence, Iran is not even close to having a nuclear weapon. And then there was a reporter, I think a MSNBC or NBC reporter, that kind of pinned President Trump down as he was about to get on Air Force One, I think just a few days ago, and said, Tulsi Gabbard in March briefed you and said, Iran doesn't have a nuclear weapon. We're only 2 months away from that. And President Trump was like, I don't care what she says. He's gone a little rogue, man. He's gone a little rogue. Like it just, I've had a few different people on the podcast that were all Trump supporters and that all voted for Trump. And I did as well, by the way. I'm not at a point where I regret that yet, but man, I'm getting real close because he's absolutely gone rogue. Let me touch on a couple things you said, because again, what's great is you've kind of reinforced a lot of things I've talked about on this podcast. There's the famous General Wesley Clark quote from 2007, where he talked about how the Pentagon was going to invade 7 countries in 5 years. You talked about that. The WMDs from Iraq. I mean, that is such a perfect example of a completely fake narrative created by George W. Bush, supported by Benjamin Netanyahu, that launched us in a 20-year forever war in Afghanistan, in Iraq. $8+ trillion of taxpayer money spent, millions of innocent lives. And at the end, George W. Bush kind of laughed it off and was like, yeah, I guess we didn't really, there were no WMDs. It's pretty insane, man. It's pretty insane.
Yeah.
What do you think? Give us the perspective of Europe. Like, again, I don't want to say what country you're in, but like, what do Europeans feel about what's going on?
I will say I haven't spoke about it much because it is a hot topic, to bring up Israel in Europe. But actually, from the Europeans I have spoken to, it's kind of a consensus here. I mean, you see the Europeans, they fly Palestinian flags. There's the protests all in Europe. I've seen it. I saw a protest in Paris weeks ago. This is happening here. It's a much less, pro-Israeli crowd. And the more I've noticed is just how the U.S. is just way off the deep end with that stuff. People here, they understand it. They get it. The media gets it. They're saying Israel, they call it a genocide, the Gaza genocide. In America, they don't even touch the word Gaza. And the public in the U.S. is so, I don't know if it's hypnotized or anything, but in Europe, everyone has the sense of reality, what's happening of, it's also, they don't really care, but it's a sense of, we know Israel's a bad guy. But if you're in Europe, you don't have a lot of say. You don't really have powerful countries here. So it's kind of just a sense of, like, Ireland the other day drafted something about, sanctioning Israel. It's just a lot of talk. France comes out, Macron comes out, Starmer comes out, they condemn it. They wrote that letter a few weeks ago condemning Israel. But they're not going to do anything about it because there's not a lot of power here. And also, they're really focused on the EU and NATO and all that stuff. This is a really kind of a secondary issue for them. But, on the ground here, people kind of, they get it, if you know what I mean. They understand who's the aggressor.
I totally know what you mean. And I think a lot of that, it's pretty interesting, has to do with, America is a very Christian oriented country. And so you're talking about now taking this back, well over 100 years, and that Judeo-Christian mentality that, what I'm learning, I'm not a religious guy, but I've had a lot of Christian pastors on the podcast and a lot of other Christians on the podcast that have really helped me understand that this goes back to the Old Testament, and there's like biblical prophecies that, quite frankly, a lot of the Christians in America abide to, and they basically think they need to protect Israel and do everything for Israel unequivocally in order for the rapture to happen and Jesus Christ to return as the Messiah and all that stuff. So I think that is rooted in America, where it's not necessarily as rooted in Europe. That's interesting. Okay, you were talking about, the other thing is we don't really get probably the real news like you do over there. So do you think right now Israel's winning or is Iran winning?
It pains me to say, but if we're looking,
nobody's winning, by the way, because innocent civilians are getting killed. But do you think, based on what you're seeing, Israel's winning or Iran's winning?
I mean, from a military point of view, it's Israel 1,000%. Iran only has a certain stash of ballistic missiles, cruise missiles. They don't have an unlimited amount. Israel is using fighter jets. They're able to fly directly to Iran, bomb 24/7. The Iranian Air Force is comprised of jets before the 1979 Islamic Revolution. They cannot compete with Israel. So if this stays as a militaristic conflict. Iran really doesn't have a prayer. Israel has everything that Iran does that is 30 years more advanced. They have 30 times it. They have the backing of pretty much the whole world. Iran's isolated right now. They have a little bit of Russian help, Chinese help, but politically, Israel's in a strong stance right now because they did it. They bombed Iran. They are forcing the issue right now about the nuclear weapons. They really did force it. That was an unnecessary issue that didn't matter what Iran wants to do with their own country. They're sovereign. They make their own choice. I mean, but Israel's winning right now. And Netanyahu made the right decision for Israel, even though for the world, it's definitely a just dumb move.
Yeah. You know what? I think you said it perfectly. I mean, again, I'm not a fan of all the decisions Netanyahu's made, especially for the people of Gaza. I mean, you watch just the innocence that's been taken away there and the destruction and the demolition. And it's interesting, I have a lot of Iranian friends, and when I have the discussions, I say, hey, at the end of the day, two things can be true at the same time. You can want regime change, but at the same time, you can agree that the person that is now spearheading the potential of that regime change is not a good person. And so it comes down to, what's the price you're willing to pay? What is the price you're willing to pay? Are you willing to let Tehran look like Gaza? Are you willing to let 50,000 Iranians perish, and then however many hundreds of thousands of others that will eventually get found in the rubble, which is what I think is going to be the case with Gaza? Are you willing to pay that price for regime change? I mean, that's the fundamental question, because it's not going to be like, returning something to Target or Walmart or Costco and getting something new. There's going to be a major price to pay. Let me ask you this. What do you think the United States is in this for? What are they trying to get out of this?
Well, there's the two answers. You have the political answer of Israel is your strongest ally in the Middle East, which is factual. In the Middle East, Israel is America's strongest ally. They want Israel to be strong so they can pretty much bounce off of them in areas. And then there's the fun option, as I like to call, why the U.S. is always entangled up in Israel. There's a lot of blackmail stuff going on. There's a lot of politicians bought off. Literally, just say the word AIPAC and people understand. President Trump was giving around $220 million from the Israeli group. Anything that Israel wants, the U.S. is pretty much going to give it to them. We give the number one recipient of U.S. aid is Israel, and we give it to them in different ways. We don't give it to them as a loan. We give it to them as pretty much a forgiven grant. We don't want to know where it's tracked. We don't care. We give it to them in a lump sum of money. They do anything they want with it. And they don't buy a lot of our jets. We ship a lot of our stuff over there and just kind of give it to them. They reverse engineer all of our stuff. We don't get much out of this. And if you look at it and say, we do have allies. Qatar's a good ally. Saudi Arabia really wants to be our ally. Syria right now was overthrown. Syria's our ally. Jordan is our ally. Egypt is the number 2 recipient of aid. We have, Iraq is a U.S. puppet. We have so many countries in the area that we have bases in, we have Air Force bases in, we have naval assets on. So it always comes back to, why Israel? Why don't we do stuff for Saudi Arabia? Why are we not invading Yemen for Saudi Arabia on the border? Why are we not helping out Syria? Why are we not pushing back for Iraq and Iran? Why is this not for Iraq? Why are we not worried about Iraq's protection? It always falls back to Israel, and that proves to us that there's some other stuff behind the scenes. There's a lot of ties with Epstein. There's a lot of ties with Blackmail, Mossad agents. It's terrifying stuff that the U.S. politicians are blinded by the stuff happening in Gaza because they can't speak out. We see this on social media. We don't even have the insider photographs of videos. We don't even talk to the people. We don't have those channels like the government officials do, and we still see it. There's something going on. There's a lot of conspiracies. There's a lot of scary stuff. Could be with Epstein. It could be people are bought off. It's so much that sadly we probably won't ever know, but we know enough to know that we're not protecting Israel. We are doing this to save our own behind, whether that's Trump, whether that's congressmen that hold dual citizenship, apparently, like Randy Fine out of Florida. He literally said if he could nuke Gaza, it wouldn't matter to him, just to make sure it wouldn't spew over on the Israeli citizens. And then he was asked about the women and children, and he just repeated it and said, well, I just worry about the Israelis. it's just a lack of compassion, a lack of
Yeah.
the human aspect. These people are literally, they see us lower than others, and they've infiltrated the government to certain extents, and this is factual. They have dual citizenship. Who's their allegiance to? Are they supporting us, or are they supporting Israel? And then it comes, what is Trump doing? No one knows what Trump is doing. These aren't America first. These are Israeli first plans to drag us into a war in the Middle East. I mean, you've probably seen the clips of Trump 10 years ago bashing Obama about the same stuff that he's doing now. And we don't know the answer to this, but it's something fishy, it's something sketchy, and it's just nasty. That's what it is.
No, I feel you, man. I feel you. And that was a great recap of a lot of different things. Did you cover much of the Epstein files? Like, have you looked at that story in depth at all?
I've looked at it as much as I pretty much am able to cover it, because a lot of that is sensitive. So it's a lot of sensitive stuff. You can't talk about it. A lot of social media channels don't like you talking about it. Instagram, Facebook, particularly, you post something on Instagram or Facebook that is anything, even questioning anything Israeli/Jewish, they freak out about it. They don't like it. So I pretty much stand back, because everyone kind of at this point, we kind of all know what's happening with that. We all know it's gross. They're not going to release it because they're involved in it. I mean, this would be the biggest bombshell in world history. The world leaders are involved on some trafficking ring. They're not going to release it because they're involved in it. Because when Joe Biden was president, how much would he have? The Democrats would have loved to have this blackmail on Trump. They would have released it the first hour they had it without even reading through it to ruin the Republicans. Same way with Trump. Trump has done some crazy stuff. If he had the files, and if he had blackmail on all these Democrats or even Republicans that he doesn't like, this would have been out on his Twitter out days ago. But it's not, because everyone's tied in. It was a 50-year scheme. Whoever orchestrated this, wink, wink, we know who. Whoever orchestrated this planned this out to have ties, hold everybody down, hands behind their back, and it'll never come out. It never will come out. It's disgusting.
I agree with everything you said, and you just made me think of something. Like, I always think to myself, why did this happen at this time? Why now? And man, they really had a good thing going. Why did they stop it? I use the analogy, they've opened up Pandora's box and it's never closing again. Why are they doing that? You just made me think of something. It's like the Epstein thing, and the way I will summarize everything I heard from you is basically they've got something on practically everybody. And so maybe they let that out of the bag and realized, okay, you know what? We don't necessarily need Jeffrey Epstein anymore. He's played his purpose. And now by opening this up to the public, knowing we're never going to reveal anything, they've got everybody in the bag, and they absolutely now understand, the people I'm talking that were and are involved. They better shut up and they better not come forward at all. That is definitely interesting. All right. Any closing thoughts on kind of, Israel, Iran? What do you think is going to happen? What do you think the next hell at this point? It's like the next day, but the next day, the next week, the next, let's say few weeks, what do you think it's going to look like?
There's this thing called the nothing ever happens crowd, but I think something is going to happen. I think the U.S. is going to get involved. I keep peering at the TV to look at the news, even though it's off right now. That's how much I've been just looking at this. It's the U.S. is sending strike carriers or sending jets over there, or we're sending tankers. It's hard to say, but Trump wants to get involved. Israel wants us to get involved. Iran pretty much wants us to end because they can't gain anything out of this. So if you're the U.S. and Israel seeing Iran against the ropes, you have complete domination over the skies. I don't see why they would stop. I don't see why Israel at this point would stop. They obviously don't care about, humans. They don't care about death. They don't care about civilians. So if you're Israel, why would you stop? I can see this going on for weeks, months. Do I think we'll get to a regime change? Probably not. That's a drastic, prediction to make, because that would change the landscape of the world. So it's kind of hard to really pinpoint a prediction on that. But we know Israel wants one. We know Israel wants a complete regime change that wipes out the last competitor for them in the Middle East. A puppet would be installed. They want to throw away the Islam, which Iran right now is a terrible government. It's a terrible regime. It's oppressive. It's messy. But at the same time, we know that they are keeping Israel a little bit in check. And if we want stability in the region, there's got to be two sides of this. You can't have Israel, who are the bad guys as well in my eyes, just completely dominate the region and have the only militaristic threat in the area, because the Saudis just don't care.
No, they don't care. The Saudis are just sitting back collecting their money and hosting UFC fights. They don't care.
I know. I love Saudi Arabia. I want to go there. I know they have some problems. They have problems. You know, if I wore a cross there, it'd probably be a little bit of an issue. But
yeah,
I like how Saudi Arabia just minds their business. They play both sides. It's really smart what they do. It's very smart. I applaud it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. They're like Switzerland with oil and hotter weather. I mean, yeah, you can't poke a hole in the way they do things, you know. And I will tell you another thing I like about the way you deliver content is, you know, you absolutely do give your opinion. You're not shying away from giving your opinion, but you also present things objectively. And I feel like on social media right now, you know, the folks that I hope, you know, gain bigger followings, yourself included, hell, myself included, are the people that, quite frankly, present the facts to people with their take. That's totally fine. But, you know, everyone's got to take in the information and decide for themselves what they think the truth is and what they think is really going on. So I did want to tell you, I think you do a great job of that. The regime change, like you said, I mean, I personally, and this is just kind of reading the tea leaves of what I'm seeing going on, I could see them trying to make that happen and then bring in the old Shah of Iran's son, Reza Pahlavi. And the reason I say that is because Reza Pahlavi has an incredibly close relationship with Netanyahu. I mean, there's pictures of them together all the time. And then secondly, you know, that could be the guy they install in there. Trump is the art of the deal. So all of a sudden Trump gets a very preferential oil deal. Our oil and natural gas needs are shored up and we leverage Iran for that. It really goes back to exactly like Reza Pahlavi's dad, the Shah, when he got put in power in 1953 and they signed a, you know, consortium oil deal at that time. It's basically that. And then people ask me, they're like, well, are you good with that? I'm like, you know what? I'm good with it if it improves the lives for the Iranian people and if they get the freedom that they want and, quite frankly, that they deserve. But it's like colon cancer versus liver cancer. Which one do you want? You know, it's not great decisions if the price of admission comes with the destruction we've seen in Gaza. That stuff is just that stuff has been mortifying.
If you don't have Iran there, if you don't have Iran posing the threat, what will Israel do? Israel, every time a new regime falls, they completely go off the rails. They completely all of a sudden want to justify that a neighboring country is going to attack them one day. We see it with they think Lebanon, they think Hezbollah in Lebanon is going to attack them. Like, newsflash, Netanyahu, they're a defense force. If you invade a country and they fight back, that doesn't make them terrorists. That's not how the world works, buddy. And that's how he tries to push this. So if you don't have Iran there, who's the West Bank, you can completely kiss that away for the Palestinians. Gaza will be completely gone. Who knows what will happen to Jordan? Who knows what will happen to the Golan Heights? Who knows what will happen to southern Lebanon? Because Iran is the only thing that keeps Israel in check. It used to be Iraq and Iran, then Syria with Assad. The dominoes keep falling, and it's, yes, Iran is a bad problem. Iran is awful. But if you install that pro-Israeli government in Iran, the Iranian people deserve it. They deserve freedom and all of that. It's at the price of the Jordanians, the Palestinians, the Gazans, the Lebanese, the Syrians. It's at the price of all of those people in the area. It's a lose-lose situation. There's really no correct way to do this. There really isn't. And how you know who the problem is that every situation, it ties back to Israel. Every single one. This isn't just a conflict between Iran and Syria or Lebanon and Syria, Turkey, nobody. It always ties back to this situation is going to benefit Israel. That's what it always, every war the past 20 years has always tied back to, and it has resulted in benefiting Israel. And that's how you know that there's something behind the scenes happening, and everything's at the price of somebody else. The Israelis get benefits, the Gazans are hurt. The Israelis get benefits, the Lebanese are hurt, the Palestinians are hurt. Now maybe the Iranians. It's two sides of a card. It's horrible.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. No, that you're absolutely right. You know, you just made me think of something. You know, Iran obviously has played the role of the boogeyman, the big bad wolf, you know, the enemy. The question becomes, let's say a pro-Israeli/American regime is put into Iran and you've got Reza Pahlavi, the son of the Shah, brought back, and all of a sudden you've got a very pro-American, pro-Israeli great relationship. Then the question becomes, then who's the next boogeyman? And if there's no boogeyman, what happens to the military industrial complex? And if there's no need for the military industrial complex, and there's no need for America sending $3.5 billion of defense to Israel every year, then does all that money dry up? That's why I don't, you know, it's like that makes me think, like, do they want regime change? Because now you need a new boogeyman. And then does China become the boogeyman? Obviously, there's the Russia-Ukraine stuff, and we'll touch on that in a second. But, you know, when I look at really the past 35 years, when the Cold War ended and the Soviet Union basically was broken up into everything, they needed a new boogeyman. And then all of a sudden, 2 years later, you know, Islamic jihadists popped out from the ground, and all of a sudden there is a war on terror. And they've been milking that war on terror, quite frankly, since probably the first Gulf War in 1993. It's pretty wild, man. You sit back and you, like, you know, look at everything like a revisionist historian, and you're like, holy shit, has all this been done on purpose in order to feed this military industrial complex monster that Dwight D. Eisenhower tried to warn us about?
Yeah.
Anyway, interesting. All right. Actually, last question on Israel and Iran. Do you think China and Russia will come in at some point? Like, I know they technically back Iran, but similar to Saudi Arabia and then Switzerland as the great example, you know, do you think those guys, if push came to shove, they really have Iran's back, or they'd kind of be like, you know what, we've got bigger deals to make with Trump in the United States, and basically cast Iran to the side? What do you think?
Well, Russia has pretty much halted all of their arms shipments to Iran right now because they have pretty much a full war going on in Ukraine. So they have pretty much stepped back, and we know proof of that, which is why Syria fell about 6 months ago. The Russians are out of the Middle East. They're done with it. They want to focus on home. They want to focus on Europe big time because NATO is inching up on them. So the Russians are completely out of it. The Chinese is on everyone's minds right now. China's increasing their presence in the Middle East. They're completely combating anything that the Israelis or the Americans want to do, pretty much. But China has not interfered pretty much anywhere, ever. The past 50 years, the Chinese, because the biggest gripe about the Chinese military is that they've never been in combat. They've never been in battle. They don't have any experience whatsoever. And the Chinese, I just don't think they want this. It's not in their doctrine. The Chinese are too focused on Taiwan, which is going to spark off in the next few years. Yes, they will give Iran enough to prevent a regime change, but if push comes to shove, I don't think the Chinese are going to risk anything on their end. They're a growing economy, they're a growing military. There's not anything for them to gain. The oil prices for them are pretty much going to remain the same. They get a lot from Russia anyway. So for the Russians are completely out of it. The Chinese are going to do bare minimum to say they're helping, to show the world, hey, look, we did something, because they run a big propaganda scheme on the world, the Chinese do. I saw videos months ago that a plane from China was dropping aid onto Gaza, and it was the Chinese media was pushing that everywhere. They do a lot of this internet propaganda. So a lot of this is
By
just
the way,
for
that was
say.
a fake. That was a fake
Yeah,
video, wasn't it?
I
Yeah,
guess.
yeah. That's crazy. You know, that's crazy that the Chinese pushed that fake video. Wow, that's pretty wild. You know, I think you actually made me understand that pretty well. You know, I haven't really known where Russia nets out on, you know, would they really have Iran's back? But I think you're right. And so that moves us into, I do want to spend a minute here just getting your overall take on Russia versus Ukraine. And you can take that back to 2022, and I don't even really know what your thoughts are on that. But, like, or if you want to, you know, basically just give us what you think is taking place and what you think has been taking place on Russia Ukraine, I think that would be interesting.
Yeah. See, I covered Russia-Ukraine extensively on my old TikTok. They struck it down because you are not allowed, apparently, to say certain things, even though it's factual. But to understand this conflict, you can't look at 2022. It didn't start in 2022, like a lot of people think. It started in 2014 when Ukraine was a post-Soviet state. They were independent. They were sovereign. They were by themselves. No problems of the world. And all of a sudden, the Americans started poking their head through. There's phone calls. Victoria Nuland, $5 million to the leaders of Ukraine, essentially, to step down. And we saw that. A coup ensued in Ukraine. Ukraine was splitting between joining Russia or the EU. Before their decision was even made, a coup was split. A coup happened. The regime was overthrown, and we had a pro-Western government installed. And we fast forward 1 year later, the Donbass, which is a majority ethnically Russian area. These people look at this as a problem, as an attack at their way of life, because the Ukrainian government started something called de-Russification, which is something, the Russification, which is the promotion of Russian values that the Soviets did in Finland decades ago, in the century ago in World War II. So the Ukrainians started turning this on the Russians in their own country. In the Donbass, they started restricting the Russian language, Russian books, the Russian Orthodox Church, arresting priests. You couldn't speak Russian in city council meetings, even in the Donbass, where some people don't even speak Ukrainian. You were not allowed to speak Russian, or you would face fines. So the Russian people in these two regions, southeast Ukraine, the Donetsk and Luhansk regions, that declared their independence, war broke out in 2015. All because of the coup. The United States pushed it. Europe pushed it. They wanted to completely pressure and isolate Russia. A coup broke out. And then it's called the war in Donbass.
And by the way, that coup was to overthrow the democratically elected guy, Viktor Yanukovych, yes. Correct?
Okay, yes, all right. He was elected.
All right. This is funny. I didn't really know where you stood on this, but we're very aligned on our interpretation of all that. But okay, go ahead. Yeah, talk about so the coup takes place. They get rid of democratically elected Yanukovych because from my research, he kind of was like, hey, we don't want to join necessarily Russia, but we definitely don't want to join NATO. Why don't you just let us be? We're good. Let us be Ukraine. So then go on. The Donbass and the Donetsk, yes. All those regions that Nikki Haley has no idea where they were, but she wanted to drop bombs on them. Those guys.
Yeah. So pretty much the president came out, the democratically elected president, and said, we're just going to be neutral on all this. The U.S. said that's not going to happen, interfered. So we get to the war in the Donbass, which is essentially a civil war. The Ukrainians don't like saying that, but it's a civil war. Your own civilians and citizens are fighting against you. So since 2015 to fast forward to 2022, there were horrific massacres. The Ukrainian military, the government, was bombing, killing, massacring their own civilians in the Donbass, these people that wanted their own independence. They wanted to be able to speak their language, practice their own religion. They fought for this. And then we had an agreements, the Minsk 1 and the Minsk 2 agreements. One was in Belarus, and then one was, I remember it was Zelensky, Putin, Merkel, and Macron. The agreement was simple. Ukraine stop attacking its own citizens, and these two regions get pretty much independence, but it was de facto independence. They stay Ukrainian. These regions would stay Ukrainian. They weren't leaving the country. They weren't joining Russia. They would essentially become their own republics within Ukraine with their own elections, but at the end of the day fall under the government and the government's authority. Russia said this is okay. The two republics said this is okay. Ukraine said this is okay. And then one day after the meeting, the Ukrainians resumed operations. Just like that. Like nothing happened. They wanted the war with Russia. There's nothing else to say about this. So we get to February of 2022. After 7 years of letting this happen, the Russians are watching it, just watching an absolute bloodshed, a massacre. Something a lot of times I compare to Gaza. You have these people that can't defend themselves being massacred. And then the number one talking point from the Ukrainian side is the Russians were supplying them and funding them. Yeah, that's kind of how a civil war, that's what a proxy is. That's what they're going to do. They're not going to let them starve off and die. So the Russians launch what they call a special military operation. It's an invasion. We all can pretty much understand that. They launch the invasion. They get close. They get to Kyiv, the capital, in 2 weeks. They go to Turkey, Istanbul, for the agreements. Boris Johnson tells Zelensky, pull out of the peace talks. We're going to supply you as long as you need. This is why the Russians withdrew from Kyiv. They had it encircled. They withdrew. Putin's offering of goodwill, saying, we're this serious about ending this right now. We're going to withdraw our troops from your capital, sign the deal. We'll go back to square one. Ukraine let the troops withdraw. They set up fortifications. Zelensky flew back to Kyiv. Everything ended, and we're here right now. NATO has been expanding eastwards for decades. And don't get it twisted. NATO is not a defensive alliance. NATO is made to combat Russia and destroy Russia. Everybody in NATO hates Russia. They want Russia gone. So how are you supposed to tell Russia that, don't worry, we're here in case you attack us, as they add Finland, as they add Sweden, as they add Poland, the Baltics. They add these people literally on their border. And they wanted to add Ukraine. They wanted to add Ukraine, NATO did. And Russia forever, they said, we're going to want Ukraine to be neutral, like Ukraine wanted in 2014. We want Ukraine to be neutral, not joining the EU or NATO. They're not going to join any of our agreements. We're going to let them decide their own fate. We're going to let them be a buffer, like Belarus is, a simple buffer state between these two countries. NATO couldn't allow it. The U.S. couldn't allow it. Russia couldn't allow it. At what point is Russia supposed to act in their own interests? Putin is a Russia-first guy. When you keep threatening his country, expanding eastwards with NATO that is designed to destroy Russia, kill Russians, that's what NATO is for. They hate Russia. Yeah. That's all it is. Putin had that one red line. That's all. He just said, never let Ukraine join. They let Finland on the border join, the Baltics on the border join. They let everybody they wanted. Anybody could have joined NATO except Ukraine. So January of 2022, Kamala Harris comes to the stage at a NATO conference and says, the pathway is open to Ukraine's membership into NATO. A month later, the invasion happens. It's a domino effect. It wasn't unprovoked. This wasn't a random invasion. The war was already happening in the Donbass. And if you look at the battle map, you will notice Russia only controls the Donbass. They only control the region that they've wanted to control forever. They've only controlled the region they wanted peace for. They're not invading into Ukraine. There's no new offensives. They push in a little bit here and there into Sumy just to show Ukraine if we wanted to, we would. It's a defensive trench warfare for a reason. There's no new offensives. Russia is okay with where they're at. They're using volunteers and inmates. Russia's sanctioned off by the world. Russia's building tanks and factories by Russians. The Western world right now, everybody is supporting Ukraine. This isn't Ukraine versus Russia. This is a world versus Russia. And Russia, with their one country, is able to fend off NATO, any counterattacks, any of that. This is where we're at now. It's a stalemate. I don't know how much longer this is going to go. The Russians have shown a little bit. They're willing to talk. The Ukrainians have shown a little bit. Each side's demands are a little absurd. I will say the Ukrainian demand that Russia should just withdraw everybody and just concede all the land they've had to go back to the pre-war conditions, which would just lead to another war. That mindset by the Ukrainians is absurd. The Russians have time and time again said, we will have peace today if we just set these boundaries where they're at today, and this can end. We'll govern over the two regions that have wanted to leave you for 10 years. Remember this, people. Ukraine's trying to recapture land that has been against them for 10 years. If they if they recapture the Donbass, the people of the Donbass are going to resume fighting. This war, unless Russia holds this area, it's going to be a war forever. And it's never going to stop.
And I think the people of the Donbass, if I'm not mistaken, they're 60%, maybe even more Russian, and they want to be part of Russia. So, all right, you know what? That was a very good summation. And I've talked about Russia, Ukraine a decent amount on the podcast. And basically, you have just reinforced everything that, you know, one of my two favorite guys are Professor Jeffrey Sachs and Professor John Mearsheimer. I look at the way those guys have talked about it, and a lot of what you said, you know, falls in line with the way those guys have talked about it. All right, listen, man, I know you're a little bit pressed for time, so this was fantastic. We really kind of touched on, you know, the one thing that is absolutely all over the news right now being Iran versus Israel, and then it was great to get your perspective on Russia versus Ukraine. I'd love to do this again, though. I think you bring a lot to my audience, and especially basically getting the news from Europe and from other places. I think that's very healthy. I think Americans, I personally try to seek out news. I mean, outside of the United States mainstream media, to me, Fox is CNN, is MSNBC, is NBC, ABC, CBS. Those guys are all absolutely worthless because each one of them is pushing their own narrative. And so I think that has led to the rise of, not only big podcasts like Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, Joe Rogan, all those guys, but then independent content creators like yourself, who quite frankly are spitting the truth, man. So I appreciate it. Any parting words, any closing thoughts, anything you like to see, or any advice to world leaders?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty simple for advice to world leaders. Just focus on yourself. Just focus on your own country. Stop poking your heads everywhere, and the world can finally have peace. There's no need to bomb anybody, no need to take any land that you believe is given to you by somebody up above. Just sit back.
Yeah,
You have
yeah.
your countries. These world leaders, they're billionaires. They have all the power in the world. I don't get what drives them to create this Napoleonic legacy. It's 2025. We don't want any of this anymore. Just worry about your own economy in certain places. Like Israel, Netanyahu has bribery cases against him. He should be worrying about that. He shouldn't be worrying about Iran and Palestine. And I guess some words to the viewers out there at the end right here is, you need to find new news sources. You need to go to Twitter and X. You need to follow me. You need to find all of these places that can tell you news, even if you don't like it. I get news that's from perspectives that I disagree with. But the news isn't on the facts. The news is what facts you choose to report on. That is what the news is. There is no objective news. Everything is subjective. It's whether or not you choose to select the news that makes you feel good or the news that makes you think. And I promise you, if you listen to this podcast and listen to me, you're going to have the news that really makes you think and change your mind. Because 6 months ago, I was completely on the other side of this. I was the pro-Israeli guy, pro-NATO guy, European Union guy 6 months ago. And I started researching it. Yes.
That's interesting. That is interesting. Okay, I did not know that as well. That's incredible that when you dug in and when you started basically looking for your truth and stop listening to the narratives that get created by what we traditionally consider news, you realized, dude, that's amazing. That's amazing. I applaud
It was in
you for
November.
that.
I remember trying to argue against somebody I was the pro-Israeli side, and I was arguing against somebody that was pro-Palestinian, and I wanted to research history a little bit to try to gain something for my side, and I noticed, I was like, I didn't know a lot about this. I didn't know what I was even talking about. So everybody's got to research to know what they're talking.
All right, Ethan. All right, listen, everybody. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode as much as I did. Ethan Levins, I will put all his stuff. Make sure you listen to him. Make sure you follow his Instagram. Well, I think I just turned into Stephen A. Smith. But anyway, all right, listen, buddy. Definitely want to have you back, and you call a spade, which is my tagline. So hang on the line, and we will talk to everybody soon.
This episode was brought to you by the new book, Deep Shallow Dive Into You, available now on Amazon and Barnes & Noble in hardcover and paperback. Don't forget to sign up for our new mailing list on our website at deepshallowdive.com.